Before this video starts, if you enjoy this video, there are many more like it already on the channel, with many more like it to come in the future, so subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so I would really appreciate it. I upload 6 days a week on this channel, so if you're looking for some consistent basketball talk, this is the place for it. Also, drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference. Also, real quick, I'm not going to show a clip this time, but there is a new episode of my podcast out where we had Mark Jang, formerly known as MDJ, on as a guest. It was a really fun episode, so if you haven't seen it yet, go check that one out. Today, because the Big 3 Miami Heat video did so well, I thought I would start a series on some potentially disappointing teams throughout history. Like a why didn't this team work type of thing. And I figured there'd be no better team to start with than the Lob City Los Angeles Clippers. This team is easily one of the most fun teams of all time. The combination of the high-flying big men with Chris Paul's incredible vision, on top of having one of the flashiest scorers the game has ever seen in Jamal Crawford, the Lob City Clippers were must-see TV. But after Paul, Blake, and DJ had 6 seasons together, not only did they not have a championship to show for it, not only did they not have a finals appearance to show for it, they did not even have a conference finals appearance to show for it, in an era of the West where it was pretty damn open up until the Warriors came around in 2016. But when you consider the context of a lot of injuries on this roster, the series they played, and many other factors, were they really a disappointment or just a victim of circumstances? Or maybe, just maybe, was it crazy to even give this team championship aspirations in the first place? Let's talk about it. This team became known as the Lob City Clippers as soon as Chris Paul laced up for them for the first time. After the Lakers were denied their opportunity to pair Chris Paul with Kobe, he instead went to the other LA team in the Clippers to play with their young, exciting player, Blake Griffin. Blake is probably the best rookie of the last decade. He came onto the scene averaging 23 and 12, as well as 3.5 assists, shooting 50% from the field. He made the All-Star team. He dominated with his athleticism, threw down some of the nastiest dunks, and just overall dominated. There was also DeAndre Jordan on this team, who is a high flyer himself. He was incredibly athletic, probably the most athletic center in the league, and that helped him on both ends of the court. On defense, he was a very good shot blocker, averaging around 2 to 2.5 blocks per game in the Lob City era. He was a great rebounder, leading the league in boards 2 years in a row with 13.6 and 15 a game. On offense, he had basically no game outside of some putbacks and, of course, the alley-oops, but he was so athletic that the total lack of any moves didn't really matter. He led the league in field goal percentage for 5 seasons with the Clippers, and he had an average of 69%. Nice. So these 3 made the core of the Lob City Clippers, with Paul and Blake being the main duo. And while there were a few other good role players on this team, the 2 most notable ones were the shooting guard tandem of JJ Redick and Jamal Crawford, with JJ being a lethal sharpshooter and Jamal being a hot hand volume scorer and one of the best 6 men in the league. And this team was coached by Doc Rivers, who's been up and down in terms of public perception of how good of a coach he actually is. The general consensus seems to be that he's great at giving some Captain America-esque speeches, but his actual X's and O's game is kind of eh. But that is essentially the construction of the Lob City Clippers. Let's go over their history as a team together from beginning to end. And to start, they were already a little bit disappointing, getting just the 5th seed in the West, where they did meet the grit and grind Grizzlies in the first round, where they won in 7 games. Paul and Blake were both awesome in this series, and by the way, JJ and Jamal hadn't quite joined this team yet, so the key role players were Eric Bledsoe, Caron Butler, Nick Young, and Mo Williams. But they would be swept in the second round versus the Spurs, with Blake playing okay, but Paul really struggling, averaging just 13 points on 37% shooting. Next year, the team won 56 games, and again, this was a bit before JJ Redick joined the team, so there were some stretch marks role players here, guys like Grant Hill, Caron Butler, Lamar Odom, Ronnie Turioff, and Chauncey Billups. Lots of older, well past their prime former stars, as well as Jamal Crawford, who had joined the team this year. But this time around, they once again matched up with the Memphis Grizzlies in the first round, but they lost in 6 games, and for a reason why, I'm not entirely sure. None of the big players missed any games. Blake did come off the bench for one of those games, and for what reason reason I do not know. I guess the Grizzlies just outplayed them. Grit and grind beats the flash of Lob City, I suppose. Then in the offseason, they signed JJ Redick, as well as Darren Collison, who was one of the best backup point guards in the league. JJ averaged 15 a game while shooting 40% from 3 on 5 attempts a game. This addition made the Clippers the best offensive team in the league. The duo of CP3 and Blake was tough enough to guard. Now there's a guy on the floor that you have to be glued to because he's one of the best shooters in the league. All this with a high teen score coming off of the bench. They won 57 games this season, getting the 3rd seed in the Western Conference. I do want to point out though with this Clippers team, because so much of their money was invested in their top younger players, this team had a lot of retirement home players on it. Here is a list of every player that was on the verge of retirement that played for the Clippers within this 6-year span. Brian Cook, Chauncey Billups, Caron Butler, Kenyon Martin, Grant Hill, Lamar Odom, Ronnie Turioff, Ryan Hollins, Anton Jameson, Steven Jackson, Hito Turkoglu, Danny Granger, Sasa Vujacic, Willie Green, Big Baby Davis, Ekpe Udoh, Nate Robinson, Pablo Prigioni, Paul Pierce, Josh Smith, Allen Anderson, and Brandon Bass. Good fucking god. This was not the Lob City Clippers, it was the Dentures and Diapers Clippers. But anyways, in 2014, the Clippers in the first round matchup against the Warriors, who were not quite 60+ win MVP Steph Warriors, but still pretty good, and they actually showed a sign of what they would be in the future as they pushed the Clippers to a 7-game series. In the second round, the Clippers matched up against the OKC Thunder with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, and they lost in 6 games. The reason for this was, once again, they just simply got outplayed. Next year comes around, it's basically same old, though in the first round, they did have easily the best playoff series that team ever had, winning in 7 games versus the defending champion San Antonio Spurs off of a clutch shot from Chris Paul. But in the second round, coming from the high of winning that series that was really a toss-up, they then blow a 3-1 lead to the Houston Rockets. They lose in Game 5 by 21 points, and then in Game 6 with a 19-point lead and it pretty much in the bag, they completely fucking blow it. They lose in Game 5 by 21 points, and then in Game 6, they blow a 19-point lead to fucking Josh Smith and Corey Brewer. In a game that should have sealed the series and finally gotten the Clippers that conference finals appearance that they had been missing, they blow it, and in Game 7, they lose by 13. Just an absolute collapse. Now, it is worth mentioning that Chris Paul did miss 2 games in this series, but with that much of a blown chance, they don't get any excuses from me. But that did really start the injury plague that happened with this roster from there on out. In the playoffs next year versus the Blazers, CP3 and Blake missed 2 out of the 6 games played in that series, so they lose that series that they otherwise would have won. And in 2017, the last year with this core together, they lose to the Utah Jazz as Blake Griffin misses 4 games. So that is essentially the history of the Lob City Clippers. Now the question is, was this a disappointment, and if so, should it have been? What I mean by that is a lot of people in retrospect say that this Clippers team really should have never been considered a championship contender in the first place. But I would disagree because I believe that's a take that happens in retrospect. Like, everyone thought the Clippers had a chance at the time, and I think this is a core that had somewhat of a shot. The problem is this team earlier together failed to really put it all together, and then later on they were plagued by injury. I will say this about this team, I don't like how people just dismiss any criticism of the Lob City Clippers with, well, they had injuries. They really didn't have injury problems until they were basically doomed to not really win a championship because the 2016 Warriors and on existed. Like 2015, Chris Paul missed 2 games versus the Rockets, but they should have won that series anyways, and then the next 2 years after that, they really didn't have a shot because I don't believe they were going to beat the 2016 Warriors. Maybe the 2015 Warriors, but not 2016. After the Kobe and Pau Lakers were done, from then to 2016, there was a fairly open window for this team making it to the finals. In 2012, they could have put up a fight against the Spurs, but they didn't. In 2013, they could have beaten the Grizzlies, but they didn't. The series versus OKC could have gone their way. And in 2015, I believe the Clippers could have beaten the Warriors, but they decided to blow a 3-1 lead to the Houston Rockets. Yes, injury was a factor for this team, but there was really only 1 year where the Clippers had a championship window for real where you could blame that on injury. So no, I don't believe injury is an excuse for this roster because it really wasn't a factor until their window was pretty much already closed. I think a big part of the failure of this team can be blamed on the front office of the Clippers at the time because they did a horrible job building around this core. They got 2 truly good role players on this team over 6 years, and that's not great. Really, one truly good wing would have made a world of difference for this team, but instead they signed Grant Hill and Paul Pierce and traded for Danny Granger when all three were well past being good. All three of those dudes needed a wheelchair half the time, not just Paul Pierce when he decided to shit himself. But this team had quite a few collapses, and I do not think this team gets a pass. I think everything that happened to them was on them because they had a legitimate window and they did not execute. So yes, the Lob City Clippers were disappointing. That is the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.